Well, welcome to the M Network podcast. Today we're talking about this administration's desire to end DEI and what that might mean for our partners in the nonprofit, community foundation, government agency world, and anybody looking to do good things in communities that have been historically underserved. Joining me today is Mark Richard. He's a labor attorney and he is a partner at Phillips, Richard, and Rinds. And he's generously taken his time to sort of put this in perspective for the rest of us. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm fine, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Well, as you know, this administration seems bent on ending DEI as we know it. The thing that sort of set the firestorm off was this.
My administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector. With the recent yet somewhat unexpected great Supreme Court decision just made, America will once again become a merit-based country. You have to hear that word, merit-based.
I don't have to hear it. So, can you put this in perspective? What does this mean for organizations that are heavily invested already in DEI, in nonprofits, in community activists, in grant-making organizations, and philanthropic efforts?
Well, sure. So it's a seismic sea change on one level. And without getting legal advice, we'll tell you to get legal advice as our only legal advice today. But I think we all want to put things in perspective, right? So one of the first questions is, how does the state or federal law changes that came under Governor DeSantis and President Trump, how do they impact my organization? And normally there are several routes in. These routes have been around forever. They underpin the 1960s civil rights laws that many of us are aware of. And either you're receiving some sort of funds from the government, or you come under the Interstate Commerce Clause, you have enough employees to be under federal law where you have to not discriminate on the basis of gender, not discriminate on the basis of race. The things that we have known really since the 1960s. One of the executive orders reversed was one that Lyndon Baines Johnson wrote that President Trump just reversed. And so if you are one of your organizations, the ones you listed, you're probably receiving some sort of funds, right? Federal,
right. This is the problem. The problem is that the funds are attached to the government, and the government's go help these people, but now we're not going to pay for it if you help those people.
Yeah. So what's happening is the power of the purse is being used to wield the power of the executive and their political philosophy and agenda. So first, to be totally fair, because I find I have enormous problems with what's going on, but to be totally fair, the connections, the use of funding and the use of enough interstate commerce to fall under the federal jurisdiction are things that have been used by both parties and both sides to move agenda.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but just to be fair, I want to be fair here. Now, why is it seismic? Because I believe at the center of this is a calculus that says white males, I guess I'm one of them, white males have been so adversely impacted through the laws from the 60s and now the DEI paradigm that we're going to set the balance back using some of their words and go to merit. And that implies, which I think is a fundamental question we all have to ask ourselves, that implies that when a minority was given a chance to have a job, that somehow they can't do that job. That there's a white male, and I say male on purpose, who absolutely could do that job better than the person that received it. And but for their race, gender, they couldn't handle that job.
That's just racist as hell. I'm sorry. It's
reverse. it's literally saying it. So there's a lot of signals going on,
Yeah.
including
Okay.
theme songs at rallies, that it is the reign of white men who have been displaced by inferior others to take their jobs. The other question is a social question. All of your clients, you have such a great portfolio, and all of America's corporations, from the Fortune 100, 500, still have a social and civic duty. Some of them are in their charters, and some of them they've taken on as corporate citizens. And we're going to have to ask ourselves, within the confines of the law, not to give up on the things that we believe in. And I believe you still can navigate. They're basically saying that the original anti-discrimination laws do not allow you to have a DEI program, because that in itself is discriminatory. And so some would argue that's circular reasoning and basically a smokescreen. But those citizens and your nonprofits and your agencies and your grant recipients have to have that dialogue of what is the legal guardrails and what's my ethical social responsibility in this, to not throw in the towel and do this legally, but not be afraid to shrink from the things we hold near and dear.
Do you think it's going to get tested? Do you think somebody's going to push back hard enough that it goes to courts and crawls its way up to courts and we get a ruling on this?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
No doubt.
No doubt. Yes. Governor DeSantis, one of his edicts got overturned by a judge when he tried to control completely private sector corporations. By the way, footnote, a lot of folks in the Republican Party now, and I say this with respect, take the position that smaller government is better government, right? And that the private sector generally can do things better in many areas. Let's just accept that for a moment, because there's some, legitimacy to that.
There's a track record, with the exception of spending massive amounts of cash. Sure.
Well, there's companies that go bankrupt every day in the private sector.
Right.
A lot of people have looted their companies.
No, what I'm saying is I don't think a private corporation, up until Elon Musk, could launch rockets into space. I don't think they could amass enough capital that governments could amass.
Exactly. And so in any event, a court threw that out along its initial track. So because there are advocacy groups, from the labor unions that I worked with my entire legal career, to civil rights organizations, to policy organizations, to think tanks, to constitutional protection organizations, sometimes on both sides of the aisle, there's going to be legal challenges, I predict, absolutely, to all of this. Now, in the meantime, if you're so dependent upon these funds, the control of the purse, you're going to have that difficult decision. How do I comply? Talk to your lawyers. How do I do this in a way, though, that I'm not abdicating my values if you find that these new executive orders undercut what the mission is and the of your organization?
Yeah, I mean, some of the areas that we work in, one of them specifically, we work in homelessness as an issue. And in Miami-Dade County, the homeless population is 70 to 75% Black. And if we think about this logically, we think homelessness is an outcome. It's not just a problem. It's the result of a lot of stuff that brings people to homelessness. So if we look at that 75%, we can say there's something wrong in the Black community where we're not identifying and fixing problems of substance abuse, of hidden mental illnesses, of education and joblessness, of spousal abuse. All of these things couple up. And we have agencies that specifically deal with helping this underserved population mitigate those big issues. How can they continue if not for DEI? Are they going to be said, oh, well, you can't just have a program, even though the data points to problems in a specific population?
And you raise a really good issue too, right? Which is, if you're reaching out, I was born in Miami, and if you travel around, and they've done, some of your agencies have done amazing work in trying to address this problem, but it's still a very serious problem, right? And it's unacceptable to any American. We are Americans first and foremost. of different color, different political parties, different religions, but we are proud to be Americans. And when the greatest country in the world still has people living under expressways and begging for money, we have to address them. And it's not simply something to say that person should go get a job, right? Some of them are splitting their medication, can't get their medication. And some of them have to own the state they're in. The bottom line, though, is that's exactly right, because if we're reaching out to a primarily African American population, one would argue that there would be a bona fide, what we call a BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification to have perhaps other African Americans reach out into that community.
Yes.
To talk to a police officer, to put themselves into a drug rehab program. And the same for women who are victims of sexual assault. And the same might be for someone who's monolingual here legally, but does not feel comfortable in speaking his English as their first language about something very serious, or a doctor who does not speak Spanish but needs to know the difference between a sharp pain and a dull pain and may completely inform their diagnoses.
We know this. We know from our work in healthcare, health and wellness, and family strengthening, we know that people are more likely to go to a doctor or a healthcare professional that speaks their language and understands their culture.
Exactly. And I think there's literature, if I'm not mistaken, I represent a lot of healthcare workers, that underscores that outcomes, clinical outcomes, are actually enhanced by that. And it's so simple of a proposition, one would think it's obvious. So where do you run afoul? So if you ask for African Americans and you promote someone, is it DEI? And have you risked your federal funding? Is it DEI? And the DOJ, under our new Attorney General, who comes from Florida, is issuing her own set of rules now. And are they going to come and say, this agency, and I know some of the leaders of these agencies, they're salt of the earth of this community that I was born in, they're going to be saying, you're discriminating. You are actually discriminating because you address some of those issues. Now, that being said, this is in its infancy, and we all are trying to sort this out. We do know that there have been some statements made by the new Attorney General that, like, for example, Black History Month and some of those celebratory events are not violative of her executive orders. Well, they're not executive orders, but so
Right.
They are. But the reality is, they're sorting it out as well. But the umbrella argument is a societal question.
Yeah.
We Americans, how are we going to wade through this issue? And are we just going to recoil here, or are we going to still have the honest, above-board debate about this issue?
Now, you're a labor attorney, so you're very familiar with how the law intersects with employee conduct. And when you're in the nonprofit sector or in your community foundation, social media sometimes is your only form of advertising. That's the only way you get the word out. We had an instance not too long ago where one of our clients posted a Pride Month post to their social media. It was benign. It was, celebrating that all people are equal, blah, 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 whatever. They got a call from the governor's office asking them to account for that. How far does this really stretch? Does it stretch into private social media? Like, what if I'm the executive director and everybody knows I'm the ED of this particular thing, but I'm using my personal social media to express DEI beliefs or values, or even train people in it? Can they come take my funding?
Yeah, and there's even a question: could it trip into even criminal activity? Right?
Wow.
There's a little bit of conversation of that going on in Washington, but I don't want to put that out and alarm everybody. But we can't ignore it, that the conversations are happening. It is exactly the right question, Tom. And again, your private social media, you're a private citizen. Our three branches of government now, including the Supreme Court, are, for lack of a better word, in a conservative modality. Okay, the voters speak. I get that. And the reality of it all is that we have to ask your question of all of us. And it's going to have to be asked among the constituents, the policy leaders, or to me, the fundamental question is, are people just going to both comply and become complicit? Are they going to comply because we follow the law, but are they going to be complicit and be quiet? Are they going to comply because they're going to follow the law, but be creative in challenging things, as Rosa Parks did, the seamstress who sat and would not get up from the bus. And we have a lot of dialogue and self-reflection to do as a people of a great nation. And we want to hear everybody, including white males who do believe they're victims. And the end of affirmative action, I have a big connection to higher ed. We thought it made some sense. Others didn't. It's okay to have those discussions. What isn't okay is to put people in a position where they're feeling so threatened that they give up on the debate and they give up on the query and they give up on the intellectual honesty on both sides of solving this. And I'm afraid we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, the fear is palpable. And I'm wondering if practically, should my clients be writing their policies down, making them formal, codifying them within their own organizations, wherever they stand on that? Do they need a social media policy for their employees? Is that even enforceable? Can they say, hey, I know it's your private social media, but you're a representative of this company, and we need you to act a certain way, stay out of certain arguments, that kind of thing? Is that even viable?
Yes. So first, let me say again, without giving legal advice, we are going to strongly argue and advance you to speak to your counsel about these issues, because it's all new. None of us know the answers to your great questions. And so you want to do this in a very thoughtful, deliberate, cerebral kind of way and not a knee-jerk way. That being, said, yes, there are a long line of cases, particularly in the unionized setting, because there's arbitrations there, so there's a greater body of law, but also in the non-union settings, where private social media can be a basis for adverse employment action, depending on what was said and where you said it. So if it's private and you don't have your uniform on, it might be one thing.
Right.
You're wearing your airline uniform and the insignia is clear, it may be another. If you go on and say, I'm in the aviation business and I think flight XXX is dangerous, where does that go between the paradigm of whistleblowing that's protected versus speech that is undermining your relationship with your employer? So it's complicated. It keeps all of us working and busy. But this is a fundamental change that's more than policy that's going on, I believe. And again, folks have their absolute right to be on whatever side of this they want to be. This is a major sea change in America. And I'm just hoping we don't shrink from the debate, the empirical evaluation of whether this works or not. And you brought it up, the ramifications this is going to have in our society, and in particular, the safety net that your clients put out. We are not America. We are not a civil society. We cannot believe in the tenets of our religious beliefs for those who are believers at whatever level, in whatever religion or philosophy, if we don't look at the least of us, and we also don't ask those hard questions of how much wealth gets distributed, what is the basis to get employment, do we remedy things, do we not, are there victims of our own remedial efforts? All are fair, and everybody has a seat at that table. Acrimony, hate, and chilling effect of having that arm wrestle, those lawsuits, is what is extremely worrisome to me.
Yeah, I think shying away from the debate might be the worst outcome. I think that there's probably clever ways around it, right? I'm not going to say that I'm focusing on that racial demographic, but instead I'm going to direct my resources towards specific zip codes.
Yeah.
Right. But that still doesn't get us to where we need to have the real debate.
Correct. And I don't know if they're clever as well as they're clever, but they're legally clever. In other words, in every law, there's gray area, there's interpretations, and that's why there's courts. The courts interpret statutes. The courts interpret the legality or illegality of an executive order or the behavior of an administrative agency that comes under the executive branch of government. And that's fair. That's fair play, right? And that is what makes the common law system, those common cases. So I wouldn't I believe those have to happen, and they're going to happen. Also, the first question is up for the titans of the nonprofit world, and they're titans. They don't make the same money as the private tiers, but they're important, as are the folks that run our big companies. What America do you want for your grandchildren? And after we're all gone and we've passed this earth and go wherever the next plane is, driving a Tesla or not there, or a Starlink ship there, or a rocket ship, what do we want for our grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren? And the social experiment where there were civil wars and incredible social upheaval and depressions and amazing debates and even assassinations have led us all to be carrying with us an incredible thing called the experiment of democracy and dissent and dialogue. And if we lose that, sir, I don't know if that tells us a lot about what the state of America is, even more than the actual executive order, which is quite a contrast and quite a change. But you can't look at one without asking the other, what's our obligation? What line will we cross?
Well, Mark, you have been an awesome guest. I really appreciate this. Thank you for not giving any legal advice. There was no legal advice given here at all. And I appreciate you staying in those lines. I hope I can call on you again, because I think that this and other topics are going to be of real interest to my particular clients.
Well, thank you for having me. And let me underscore this without looking like I'm being patronizing, but the M Network is exactly the kinds of mediums and dialogue and discourse that we have to have if we really believe in what you and I have just discussed.
I'll let that be the last word. Thank you again.
Thank you.